Healing Minds and Souls, a faith-based community dedicated to bringing trauma-informed care to the North Nashville community and surrounding areas through education, resources, and building relationships to develop healthy and a holistic community. Pastor Ella Clay will be talking about how we can stop allowing fear to overtake us regardless of our past, present, or future. Come and learn how to recognize signs and symptoms of trauma as we understand the emotional, physical, social, and spiritual impact of traumas. We will unpack the meanings of vicarious traumas and how to avoid moral injury as we actively avoid re-traumatizing ourselves and others. Let's learn together how to navigate life challenges of grief, trauma, pain, and/or isolation, and discover our innate strengths of courage, kindness, trust, perseverance, and become better equipped to experience a newfound confidence by not letting circumstances define our current existence or future selves. Join our show today with Pastor Ella Clay. She serves as Senior Pastor of the historic First Community Church and Executive Director of Healing Minds and Souls, 1815, Knoll Street, Nashville, Tennessee, 37208.
Good morning. We praise God that He is our shield. God is our glory. He is the lifter of our heads. Thank you so much for joining Healing Minds and Souls, a trauma-informed care community. We'll be right back with you after we hear from our sponsors.
Join host Dr. William Head each Thursday live at 4:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. The show is Let's Talk About It, chats with experts on their field, issues that affect everyone, and interviews with people who have found success in life. Are you looking to watch some of your favorite family TV shows like The Dick Van Dyke?
The Dick Van Dyke Show. Starring Dick Van Dyke.
Lucy?
The Lucy Show.
The Cosby Show and more? Look no more. With our service, you can instantly access hundreds of classic family TV shows. Plus, you can watch them anytime and anywhere. Are you looking for a way to successfully advertise your business or ministry? Look no further than North Nashville's online TV station. Our platform gives you the opportunity to showcase your business or ministry to a wide range of viewers. With our advertising service, you get access to creative professionals who can help spread your message and reach potential customers in a cost-effective manner. We understand the importance of creating an impactful advertisement, and we are committed to helping you achieve your goals.
On this morning, we have a really good friend that's here with us. She comes by the name of Miss Elizabeth Madeira. She has lived in Tennessee since 2003 and is a Belmont graduate with a master's degree from Fort Hays State University. After graduating from Belmont, she has worked as both as a Spanish and pre-K teacher, Sunday school director, and an organizer with the Southern Christian Coalition. Although Elizabeth grew up as a conservative evangelical, her journey into public policy and advocacy began when she volunteered at a crisis pregnancy center after college and realized that the key factor in caring for women in unexpected pregnancies was ensuring that access to public services like Medicaid, food stamps, WIC. Her experiences with women she connected with during their time there and her personal journey through infertility, adoption, stillbirth, and watching Sandy Hook as a young mom and teacher. And then in 2016, motivated Elizabeth to advocate for public policy that embodies Christian value of loving your neighbor as yourself through equity and justice. This advocacy work led her to volunteer with the political candidates in 2018, served as the volunteer state lead for Pete Buttigieg presidential campaign in 2019 to 2020, and then run for Glenn Casada for District 63 State House in 2020. Elizabeth and her husband live in Nashville with their 3 beautiful, intelligent children. Her hobbies include reading, audiobooks, while running in Shelby Bottoms Park. But she spends most of her time as a chauffeur for her children's multiple sports and activities. We certainly welcome you this morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It was just really an honor when you asked me to be on your podcast. So it's an honor to be here today and have this conversation.
Well, it's always an honor being in your presence. And you know, I deeply love you, respect you, and honor you for so many, many reasons. Just a wonderful, beautiful young woman, beautiful on the inside and on the outside as well. And so with that, I want to just lift up Southern Christian Coalition because you do a lot of work for them and you are an advocate. I found it interesting in your bio that you were reared as an evangelical.
Yes.
And so it's amazing how Jesus, he flips our script, as he did in the temple, he flipped the table. It's like he's flipped your life where you are fighting for equity and justice for all humanity. So can you share about Southern Christian Coalition and how that came to be?
Yes. So, Southern Christian Coalition was founded in 2017, and I was not a part at the time, but it was really started as public advocacy from Christians, people of faith, when the governor at the time was Bill Haslam was considering refusing all refugees to enter Tennessee. And they thought, okay, this is antithetical to Christian values. We are obviously encouraged to and commanded to welcome the stranger and the immigrant. And so they did public advocacy, had pastors and people sign petitions, deliver them to the governor. And through that and the work of countless other groups, he reversed course and did accept some refugees. And then since then, they've advocated around other policies, especially Medicaid expansion, supporting public schools, really against these efforts to curb what's taught in schools and book banning. We've done a lot of advocacy around common sense gun legislation reform, which has been really imperative that we continue to do that work. So it has ended up encompassing a whole lot of issues, and really the main focus is really elevating the voices of pastors like yourself who want to speak up for justice and equity issues. And I would say a lot of the lens we're looking through it now is countering Christian nationalism, because there's a whole lot of rhetoric coming from elected leaders that claims to be Christian, but is actually really contrary to our calls in the Bible and is really coming from a Christian nationalist lens. And we want to get in the traditional media, social media, out in the community, the message that is not the gospel, because the gospel is good news.
That's right. That's right.
So,
for all people.
For all people, everyone, no one is excluded. And so we really want to lift up those voices across Tennessee. So we're Tennessee specific, the Southern Christian Coalition.
Amazing. And again, we certainly thank you for the work that you're doing and you continue to do. I find it interesting, as your bio stated, you grew up evangelical. And so what happened along your journey in order to change that mindset? You are certainly an advocate and you speak out very loud and clear. You could have easily just been comfortable in that space to live your life out, a person that you could have fared well, right? But what made you know that it was something greater, was something deeper? How were you able to come out of that particular mindset that only certain people should have fairness and equity?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I do have really sweet memories of church growing up. It's funny, I used to say I started volunteering in children's ministry as soon as I graduated from it. So I was like serving in the nursery as a teenager, and but what really was implanted in my heart from that was the love and community aspect of the gospel, of the Bible. And so, however, when it related to, and of course there was a big emphasis on our personal relationship with Jesus, spending time in prayer and the Bible, and those things I'm glad were instilled in me. However, the connection to politics, once I started paying attention to the wider world and not just my insular community. I grew up in a really small rural community in Illinois. And once I started paying attention to the bigger world, I realized, oh, the world is not as simplistic as the story I was told in my comfortable community. So there were several things, and you listed them so well. A lot of those touch points, which a lot of people would probably not expect, that I started becoming more progressive at a crisis pregnancy center. But, and I know that there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot of complicated feelings. All of it is really complex, and we can't simplify what happens to every woman in what she would consider a crisis pregnancy. But yeah, working with those women, I volunteered to, my job was my role, once a woman decided she was going to carry a pregnancy to term, I met with her regularly, encouraged her to go to her doctor visits, made sure she got Medicaid and WIC and food stamps if she needed that, and every woman that I worked with did. Made sure that they got what they needed in terms of a car seat, which I think was all wonderful. But I realized this story, this like imaginary person story that I had been told about was a person who ended up in a crisis pregnancy was not true. And everyone's story was diverse and complicated and traumatic. And I realized, okay, the same people who are saying that they are quote unquote pro-life in elected office were also wanting to cut these services to women who desperately needed them. No matter whether they chose to carry the pregnancy or choose adoption or ultimately chose to have an abortion, our job as Christians is to love them, walk with them through it, and make sure that they have everything they need to thrive. And when we are cutting the services that they need to thrive, that's not actually pro-life. And so that was a really pivotal turning point for me, was just being in relationship with people who had really different life stories than I had. And then my husband and I walked through several years of infertility, and in that process, we adopted two children who are now 12 and 9, and they are amazing and keep us on our toes, as all children do.
Yes.
Not a boring moment.
Yeah.
But when we adopted, we were open to all races, and we have 2 multiracial children who are beautiful and special and smart, all those things you said. And part of the training for adoption, since we were open to different races, was reading and studying and connecting with more diverse racial stories than we had been told growing up or really got in school. So when we talk about the importance of a true history of the past of America, my husband and I can speak to saying, yes, that is needed, because we didn't really get the fullest version of history we should have, because once we started paying attention, our eyes were really open to the racial injustice in America. We were unfortunately sold a very incorrect story about history, that everything had been resolved. And it is obvious when you start paying attention that that's not true. And so really realizing the need for racial justice, to have those hard conversations, and for white people to reckon with and do the work of racial justice in communities as allies became really important to us. And so that, I think, that was another big thing where we realized, okay, this is our growing up evangelical. I was just kind of told, you just should be conservative. That's just what you do. They came together, and we realized, wait a minute, if we want to be pro-justice, pro-everyone being included, we really needed to rethink our policy stance. So that's those things. And then in 2012, our son was 6 months old, and I was teaching at an elementary school when Sandy Hook happened. And it is one of the most, one of those times, those memories where you can just put yourself back in that situation and you can feel what it was like. And it's funny because I guess I accidentally became a grassroots organizer, because I started after that calling all my friends. I didn't care their politics or their history, and I just started saying, don't you think I'm gonna go like this, but I mean, I can just remember calling all my friends and saying, we need to do something. We need gun reform. We need to ban these most dangerous and harmful weapons meant to basically enact mass shootings. But, and when it didn't happen, I thought, okay, I need to do something about this. And so, of course, I had very small children at the time, so I wasn't doing a whole lot of political advocacy. But in 2018, I knocked doors for some candidates. We lived in Williamson County at the time, and I would take my kids, like they'd be riding bikes or in strollers, and we were like knocking on doors for candidates.
They're already advocates.
They're already advocates. They're like, oh, are we knocking doors? Are we meeting strangers today,
Oh my
Mommy?
goodness, beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful.
So, but
Yeah.
so since that time, and then of course I ran for office in 2020 in Williamson County against Glenn Cassada. Knowing, and I ran as a Democrat, and I knew in Williamson County that this chances of winning were pretty slim, but I thought it was really important for people to see in Williamson County a place where where not everyone, obviously, but the political environment indicates a more insular community, and I wanted folks there to see, look, you can be a Democrat and a Christian and a Sunday school director, which was my job at the time, and to really talk about how it is my Christian faith that informs my values of wanting justice and equity, Medicaid expansion, equitable public schools, quality public schools for everyone, affordable health care for everyone, it is that call to love our neighbors ourselves that I think should really drive a lot of what we do in Christian spaces.
Well, thank you so much for that. I tell you, the work that you have done and the work that you continue to do is so very far-reaching. And I was thinking about you this morning en route as we were driving. I was driving over, and I thought about Aubrey Hendricks. And so he has a profound book, The Politics of Jesus. And he takes the teachings of Jesus. One of the teachings, he talks about treat people needs as holy. And then there's another tenet that talks about speak out for the voiceless. And those are two of the things that you do and that you help pastors, leaders to do in great, great ways. You talked about how that you are advocate and now you're teaching your children.
Yes.
And I can imagine they're going to be really powerful. I know they are as they continue to mature. But it takes a special person with a special heart that has a deeper understanding who God is and who God is still calling us to be and become. So we certainly commend you for stepping outside. Matter of fact, you don't just step outside the box, you kick the box open. You don't even wait, you just kick it open in really powerful ways. So we thank you for that. One of the things I want to lift up this morning is that sometimes people want to separate politics from theology. And so, again, as I shared about the politics of Jesus, Aubrey Hendricks called him a revolutionary individual that fought against the Roman Empire, right? So we still have an empire that we're fighting against.
Right.
That's what we have to continue to do, right? Living the life that Jesus has called us to live, and that's through loving everyone, right? Love the Lord thy God with our heart, our mind, and our soul, and loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. So that's what you are helping the pastors and the leaders and people in our community and surrounding areas, and I want to even say worldwide, for the call that I know that God has upon your life. How can you help us understand the importance of bridging politics and theology?
That is, well, first of all, thank you. That's so many kind things to say. And I want to say, I feel like it's such an honor for me to work with pastors who, they really have a great concept of this themselves, that they already want to speak up for justice, and but obviously pastors, you have so much on your plate. You are ministering, you are preparing sermons, you are serving the community and shepherding people. And so I feel like my role is to be able to maybe do a deeper dive on policy to help, bridge that gap between what pastors want to say, but also feeling like, oh, now they have maybe a little bit more of the ins and outs of policy to be able to speak out. So I feel like I'm just kind of bridging that gap and then elevating their voices, because it's the pastors who I think are making that deeper theological connection, and I am learning from them all the time, absolutely, and then helping with the policy stuff on the policy end. But I also think what I've found is pastors want to say something and again gets overwhelmed by the details, but also it's really understandable that there are faith leaders who are nervous that and they don't want to be seen as like too political or too partisan. And I think when we talk about Christian nationalism, there's a whole lot of people who we would consider pastors who have been speaking out in opposition to justice issues, and they don't mind so much about the C3 lines, and they're willing to cross it. And so I think pastors who want to speak out for justice, there are some that feel nervous about that. They don't want to cross over the lines. They don't want to be partisan, endorse someone, which I think is obviously really understandable. But I think when we're talking about policy and politics, I mean, the history of the word is like the people, the work of the people. That politics is really how we are living and working out how public policy affects our lives, and how can we not want to speak out because that affects our neighbors and our community, whether it's national level things or local things, like how can we get more equitable and robust public transportation for folks who need it. That's not crossing into partisan lines or endorsing candidates. That's how we work through policy that affects our neighbors and ourselves. And so I feel like just helping folks realize that difference, that we can focus on the policy aspect of it versus speaking about candidates or who's in power, and just call those folks to enact and pursue policy that matches our values and that serves the community.
And you certainly help pastors to communicate oftentimes what needs to be stated, and stated in a way that has great clarity and power, and that's so very impactful. Because I know with myself, there are some things that I'm very clear about as relates to politics, and then there's some things that I'm still intention about. And I appreciate you giving the pastors the space to even deal with that, right? Even in their own personal things that they have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
You give us the space to say, okay, do you want to address this issue? Or, what issue speaks to your heart? What do you have deep clarity about that you are willing to speak loud and clear? So thank you for that marriage coming alongside of us and helping us share the important information that we need to say. We have to speak out to the powers that be.
Yeah.
That's our responsibility. So thank you for helping us to be able to do that in great ways.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, with the 24-hour news cycle, I mean, we are just barraged with so much information that we can't even really take it in. And how can we, if we all tried to do everything, we'd be overwhelmed all the time. So I love that there are various pastors who have different issues that are really personal to them or more passionate. So I know, I have in my head and on paper who really wants to speak about gun reform, who really wants to speak about Medicaid expansion or women's rights or rights for the LGBTQ community. So there's, of course and of course if it's your issue that you care personally about, I may be able to get in the policy weeds, but it's something, you can tell when it's something that someone is really passionate about when they speak. And I don't want everyone to be an expert in everything, right?
Yeah. Really work in the area where you feel your strength is, and you will certainly allow us to do that in wonderful ways. So let's talk about, there's so much I want to discuss with you, but let's talk about this gun reform. It seems like it should be such a simple fix, but we know the political ramifications behind that. So can you help us to understand what goes on politically and why we are still in the trenches and in this hard space? We can see the devastation that is causing not only in Tennessee, but all over the world, particularly in the United States. So help us to understand that.
Yeah, it really is like an epidemic, like a health crisis.
Yeah.
And I work in partnership a lot with the African American Clergy Collective, which is led a lot by Shirley Bondin out in Memphis. And they are really talking about it a lot as a public health crisis, which it really is. And it is. They have gathered clergy and doctors, especially emergency room doctors, pediatricians, to talk about the harm it's doing for our community. And the politics of it, I feel, first of all, I don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but I know but what I can tell and what I have read is, there are lobby groups and political groups who end up benefiting from the mass sale of weapons of destruction, really is what they are. And they view, I've even heard some politicians say, well, because of the Second Amendment, there's going to be deaths from gun violence, and that's just a byproduct. And I cannot comprehend being willing to sacrifice the life of anybody, and especially our children, because of the glorification of a weapon. It makes to me, that makes no moral or logical sense. So I think that a lot of what it is there's kind of a narrative battle and a moral battle there for people who are willing to elevate violence and weapons as like idolatry, it feels like, because you hear people say, oh, it's the Second Amendment, it's the Second Amendment. And I think, well, there have been times where, well, first of all, we got to go back and look at the history of the Second Amendment, why they put it in place, and certainly there's nothing in there that indicates to me it's because they wanted people to be able to carry weapons that could kill lots of people out in the streets in their communities. That was not the purpose. And so I think it's a battle for our values and for valuing lives, and I think we just have to keep talking, like we just have to keep having the conversations and calling for change, and know that, I mean, we know from every public polling that the vast majority of Tennesseans, of Americans, want that change, and I think ultimately we have to make sure that we elect people that match our values and keep having these conversations and keep talking to our neighbors about it, because, I mean, I have talked to people who really, really want gun reform, but they don't realize who they have elected, who they have voted for, who are staunchly opposed to it. And so I think continuing to have those conversations so people know this is where candidates or current elected officials stand so they can make informed decisions. But I think we just have to keep using our voices and reminding folks that the voices of the majority matter. And it's at the end of the day a really moral issue.
Absolutely. And so importantly, and remember what Ms. Madeira has said, that we are responsible for electing the right individuals that will represent us. And also it's important that we keep them accountable after they get elected, because that's a different storyline. Oftentimes they will say and promise you so much, but once individuals are in office, they have a way of, So thank you. So let's talk about your work with women and the trauma, I'm sure, that surrounded the type of work. You talked about abortions, you talked about stillbirth, different things that come up, infertility, challenges that women have. And I'm sure you have walked alongside of so many women when they were dealing with those various issues. Does one particular situation stick out more so than another situation when you were coming alongside of them and helping the women through the traumatic experiences?
Wow, that's a good question. And that was at the time, and well, the interesting thing was, here I volunteered at a crisis pregnancy center, and it felt like so much, and here's one of my soapboxes, it's just the need for relationships and community. Is that, of course, we have to get folks those public services, but we need women, people in trauma, to know that we are there for them and their stories are important, and that we are there to listen and not to give them this list of solutions to fix things. And I'm sure in your work with trauma that is a huge part, is letting people just share their story from their own perspective. And I'm still in contact with one of the women that I worked with, and she has a beautiful family, a successful business, and I think she would be willing. She has said that time of us walking with her was really important. So that is a success story. And when I think of the trauma, I mean, my story comes to mind a lot because, again, I was told this really simplistic view of reproduction and family and how life is going to go. Like, I thought I was going to graduate from college and get married and start a family and have this really simple life. And, I think God is the clearest and closest to us when things don't go according to plan, even though at the time we do not welcome them. I would not wish my trauma or anyone's trauma on them. But our journey through infertility, and then we lost a pregnancy at 21 weeks, so at that point it's considered a stillbirth. And in all of the moments surrounding that, they were terrible, absolutely, and I would not wish them upon anyone, and which is why I think it's so important we talk about women's health and reproductive health in real ways that acknowledge all of the complexity of women's health and all the things that are, all the different stories of trauma and loss that can come through. It's not always this peachy, rosy, family building story. But I just realized in those moments, first of all, I don't think I've ever felt God closer than when we were in that hospital room and had a stillbirth. But like, we just felt the presence of God with us, that my husband and I both said this, even though it was the worst moment of our lives, but that God felt deeply present, and that we knew he loved us. We knew he loved our daughter. And sometimes just resting in God's love and knowing that it's true makes you feel the closest to him. But it also made me realize I could never tell a woman with whatever complicated, traumatic thing is happening to her, that I know better than she does in those moments of loss and huge decisions, because we had 10 days before we knew that there would most likely be a loss, until it actually happened. And it's just heartbreaking and personal in a way that you can't really know until you go through it or walk with someone who goes through it. And so I just have such a spot in my heart for women going through any kind of loss, because it is deeply, it's not just physical, it's emotional and spiritual, and like you do, traumatic, which is why another reason I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. What would you share with a woman that may be experiencing pain, the loss of any kind? What would you share? Or even a man?
Yeah.
Because, so that's one thing too, oftentimes we don't consider the men's perspective when a woman decides to have an abortion, or when a child is born, stillbirth. Oftentimes we focus on the woman, but what would you say to a man or a woman?
Oh, well, you're not alone, first of all. You're not alone, you're not the first or the last. That was something that was truly meaningful to me, was when people told me their stories, because I could look at people, including our next door neighbor who had gone through something similar, and I could look at them and say, they're here, they're okay, they got to the other side. And of course I would say, share your story with people that you trust, a trusted community, to help carry those burdens. And then get trauma-informed counseling. But that's another big justice issue, is how inaccessible and unaffordable it is so many times to get that trauma-informed care, which is why I think it's so lovely what you all, and like imperative what you all offer here. And I'm so grateful that that is an opportunity for the community at Healing Minds and Souls. Did I say that right?
You did.
I'm
You
just
got
like,
it right.
sometimes I'm
Absolutely.
like, we should be adding hearts and spirits, and because you do all of that,
Yeah.
combine it so well.
It's interesting because a lot of people, they always say heart, so there is a connection, right? So yeah, absolutely, you got it right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, it's just so, because, I mean, I was privileged enough that I had a relationship with a counselor, and I was able to do EMDR trauma therapy, which was really meaningful
And share
to me.
what EMDR.
Yes, I do not know what it stands for. I would have to ask, but it is, it's a really personal kind of therapy where you do one-on-one with a counselor. And it has to do with, they'll put, it sounds very interesting, but there's like a light bar that they look at, and you go back and you remember your trauma, and to try to process it, there's like a light bar that you look at while you're processing, and it's a very specific step-by-step procedure that they've been trained to do, but it helps your brain somehow connect the left and the right sides of the brain, to process the traumatic event, so that you're able to kind of walk through it, versus, a lot of times when, from my understanding, again, I'm not a trauma therapist or trained, but with PTSD, you just keep trying, your body keeps reliving it, and you feel it in your whole body.
Yeah.
And so EMDR is meant to help you kind of go, like, relive it at the time. It can be re-traumatizing to some to go through that therapy. but then it's like your mind and body is able to kind of go through it. So then when you remember it in the future, you don't get that same physical reaction. And my goodness, I wish that was and other kind of trauma-informed care was available to everyone, because so many folks are walking around carrying their trauma all the time. And I think you and I have talked about how much that affects not just your personal life, but how that intersects with public policy.
Absolutely.
Because when you are carrying around trauma, you know, we may look at someone who's really struggling, then that may help prevent you from being able to get a job,
That's
because
correct.
all the steps you have to go to get a job and apply, or to get public services, because there's so many barriers and steps that we make people go through. And when you are carrying trauma, I mean, it's like you're carrying around a backpack of rocks, right? To be able so every little thing that may seem simple is
That's right.
an extra burden. And how can we as a society, you know, help lighten that load for people so that they can get to the next step and access the resources that they need in whatever capacity that is.
Well, you certainly are assisting in us in lightening the load in so many different areas of life and politics. Again, with helping us understand who God is and who God has called us to be, to love the Lord our God with our heart, mind, and soul, and loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. What would be your final words to our audience on today?
Well, I would say don't give up. I'm guessing that your audience cares a lot about these issues too. They care about justice and equity. And I think one of the biggest problems in Tennessee is that even though, I mean, we see in poll after poll that Tennesseans agree on wanting gun reform. We want to support our public schools. We want to expand health care and Medicaid for everyone. We want these things, and the public has agreed, but we have yet to see the change in elections. And I think it's because we feel like a lot of people just feel a malaise. They feel like even though those are the things we want, we feel like we can't get there, that it's impossible. But the reality is, we are the people
Yes.
who have the ability to make it the change. And so, so like we can't miss an election, whether it's for school board, whether it's for president, any election, every election is important. And if people have the capacity, if they are not already burdened,
Yes.
you know, if you have the opportunity to go out and talk to your neighbors, help when it comes to elections, or informing your neighbors, being willing to have some difficult conversations, like the change is absolutely possible, but we have to believe that it's possible and empower our neighbors, our communities, our families to enact that change, because it really is up to us at the end of the day.
It is certainly up to us. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us on today. Thank you for all the work that you do and all the work that you will continue to do. And I'm really grateful for the Word of God that tells us, dearly beloved, I wish above all things that you prosper and be in good health even as your soul prospers. And so I believe that good health is holistic as it relates to politics, prospering in that area, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. So that's what we speak on you today, that you are prospering and you are being in good health in every area of your life. God bless you. Look forward to seeing you on next week. Thank you.